In this video, I am going to present some alternate views on evolution and biology, which I've given a lot of thought about. I believe there are three aspects of evolution which we can use to categorize broadly the different ways that living organisms undergo and experience change. The current idea of evolution falls into many different types, such as microevolution, macroevolution, divergent evolution, coevolution, reverse evolution, mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, and natural selection. But the general theme biology uses is based on a starting point of a particular species and how it becomes another one. There are gaps in evolution and many ways biology fails to appropriately define evolution. My three categories I'm proposing are: firstly, something I call generational evolution, and two types already defined, macroevolution and microevolution. But for these two, I am using my own explanations for them, so they will be different from contemporary definitions, and I'll get to these in a moment. To start, I've talked about generational evolution briefly before, reiterate and sum the concept up. Generational evolution is the means by which a species passes on its learned knowledge and experience to the next generation. This form assumes intelligence of all living organisms, already vastly diverging from biology as we know it. Why is this important in understanding evolution? Because the scientific understanding today is that animals and plants and everything evolve based on the parameters of randomness, mutation, survival of the fittest, genetic adaptation, etc. Why this is insufficient is because it fails to consider conscious decisions of animals and plants, which it presupposes doesn't exist. Consider the elephant today. Just recently, an article was published saying how they are starting to evolve to not grow tusks. This would mean in the last several hundred years of humans hunting and harvesting their ivory on an industrial level, they've changed their traits as a conscious reaction to our predatory behavior. It's not an accident or the result of a million years. It's several generations of elephants. It's too far short a time for contemporary biology to explain. They are struggling to explain how this is happening. However, when generational evolution and animal intelligence is considered, it makes sense for elephants to do this. Less ivory, the hope is, will result in less hunting. You see, evolution is a lightning-fast endeavor. We have so many gaps in our fossil records with missing links in every genetic tree. Obviously, fossils require a specific set of circumstances to survive time, so it's unlikely we'd ever encounter a spread of an animal's evolution with fossils every 500 years for a million years to see exactly how it changed over time. That wouldn't likely happen, and we don't really need that information. Our fossil records are sufficient as they are, and here's why. When an animal needs to adapt to its environment, it changes within several generations, sometimes less depending on the extremes of the circumstances and the type of species. If it took hundreds of thousands of years, nothing would have survived any of the extinction events. It's life's ability to consciously morph that allows it to survive and diversify. A species can change rapidly and then remain static. This is another hole in biology today. Why is it that beetles, which evolved 300 million years ago, have species that are nearly entirely unchanged from that time? There are unbroken lineages of unevolved beetles. In that time, there was no mutation, no gene flow, no natural selection. They wouldn't change their evolution if there was no reason to. Now, keep in mind, beetles make up a quarter of all species on Earth, so they have offspring which have evolved differently, and some that have not over the course of 300 million years. Now let's take a look at humans. In some demographics, specifically the modern lifestyle, humans are changing. Footwear is changing our bone and toe placement. Language and diet are changing our jaw and teeth structure. Computer screens and electromagnetic frequencies are altering the way our eyes see color, to the point we could lose the ability to see red. Diabetes is becoming an inherited disease, which in enough people would mean our ability to produce insulin and digest sugar is different as a species than just 200 years ago. Those are just several examples observable in our modern lifestyles. We'll return to animal intelligence shortly, but we need to learn the other two types of evolution as they build on each other and provide further context. Because of course it's all interrelated and our categorizations are simply to isolate specific terms, there isn't really different types of evolution. It's just what we call the ability of life and nature to adjust to itself. Macroevolution, as I'm using it, is about the large-scale nature changes as it relates to a species. For example, temperature changes, location and environment changes, dietary changes, and any other fundamental alterations between how a species was and how it currently is. This one is the most self-explanatory and not very groundbreaking, because it should be obvious that an organism is going to change if it goes from a jungle to a steppe. The only thing to remember is the intelligence of the animal and the fact that the changes are rapid, which is why there isn't a million different slightly evolved versions of the same organism. The changes are fast as it adapts and learns and passes on those traits to its children. And now we've reached microevolution. This is perhaps the most radical adjustment to evolution, as this is about the microscopic effects and influences of evolution, something I have seldom seen biology consider. And I think I know why, because it not only would require a complete thought process shift of the entire community, of the entire scientific community, but it also makes believing in animal intelligence almost a prerequisite. Any given multicellular organism, such as humans, can survive only because of the microbiology living in and on them. It's to the point that humans are inseparable from microbes. Removing that would kill us. They are a part of us as much as any organ or organ system in our body. We have a heart, a digestive system, lungs, a brain, a skeleton, skin, nerve roots, hair, and microbe colonies. Your hair and nails are a part of you, yet are recycled dead material. Microbes are living organisms, but not so much as considered part of you as an individual. This is because we are not individuals. We are eukaryotic organisms that have highly specialized organs, which at one point, a long time ago, were different organisms working together to compartmentalize roles for efficiency purposes. Do you beat your own heart, divide your own cells, digest your own food? The idea of self and individuality becomes muddled if actual biology is taken into account. For now, science is mostly satisfied with ignoring this. But let us take a look how microevolution is a driving force behind all evolution. We'll start with the black, loose-jawed dragonfish. The fish lives up to nearly 2,000 meters deep, where it is pitch dark. This fish is bioluminescent. It gives off its own light, allowing it to see and communicate with other dragonfish. What's fascinating about this is where it gets its bioluminescence from. A pair of organs behind its eyes gives off blue-green light, and still a second pair of bioluminescent organs behind its eyes gives off a far red light, which very few animals can see. But the dragonfish can see far red, and so has a light source it produces that only it can see. The dragonfish gets this ability by eating tiny copepods, which are crustaceans. These copepods, in turn, feed off of a bacteria that can absorb far red light. So somehow, which I do not think biology can adequately explain with their current methodology, the dragonfish has evolved to absorb the far red light quality of a bacteria eaten by another organism. This is a single example of many that illustrate how important bacteria and other microbial life directly influence a larger organism. What must also be taken into consideration is the intelligence of microscopic life as well. I think the biggest problem people have issue with every organism being conscious and intelligence is one of scale. People have, and especially science, have a rooted system of defining and justifying their beliefs and experiments, as well as a view of the natural world. To say that plants and animals are nothing more than automatons is not a scientific statement, but a convenient one. There is in fact no basis to saying animals are not conscious or intelligent. Ants are some of the most interesting creatures. There are a quadrillion ants at least, and many, many different species. There are diverse species encompassing a wide variety of complex social hierarchies, political and war dramas. They farm, develop biological weapons, create medicine, raise cattle, provide care and healing to trees, collect the heads of their enemies, mourn their dead, betray their queen, enslave other species, do undercover missions, scouting operations, build vast underground metropolises, divide labor amongst each other, class warfare. Their newborn have no skills and must be taught, and often when an ant performs poorly, they are given a new job. They use their bodies to warm their nests, build bridges and ladders, make highway systems, even as boats. Some ants can self-explode, spewing sticky and toxic liquid on their enemies. Their communication is a complex and highly efficient pheromone-based language. Ants alone should be enough evidence to convince you of animal intelligence. And I recently read a book that came out in 2021 called Empire of Ants. It provided some neat information, but most of it I had already heard before, and there was some information I had not seen, but overall it was not a terribly enjoyable read, especially when I got to the part of ant personalities. The authors proved through their tests that each ant has its own individual personality that it develops over life. This is something I don't need science to prove to me, but it is nice to see when it does, if only to convince more people who need that kind of data. But it was ruined when the next sentence the authors explain ant individuality as simply an instinctive and mechanical process. Perhaps they truly feel that ants are conscious and contain individuality, but for fear of being ousted by the scientific community have to keep their findings within that box of thinking. I don't agree with reducing your findings, but I understand they have to maintain their professional career. I'm just speculating their motives, but the very fact that you can't get away with saying something like that, even after the research supports it, is why the philosophy of science, man is the measure of all things, will forever keep our species ignorant. They also did a lot of kind of screwed up experiments to get obvious results, like cutting the legs shorter of an ant to see how that affects their ability to traverse long distances and return, which they do by measuring their own stride. And when they cut the legs of an ant during their journey, they could not find their way back home. When they did it before the journey, the ants knew how to go back home because they are calibrated from the start. But it's just like an obvious cause and effect that doesn't need to be tested. And we do this to so many animals, testing them in bizarre and cruel ways just to conclude what everyone already believes, that they are automatons acting on base instincts. On the other hand, groups like PETA that advocate for animal rights go about it all the wrong ways and make people want to kill more animals just to spite them. And there are theories that PETA is owned by some head of a meat industry, which wouldn't surprise me, but supposing they are legitimate and advocating animal rights, or just taking other groups or people that do so as an example, instead of pouring their funds into condemning people, spending millions wasting opportunity, what I suggest to any organization or person that receives that kind of funding is to put that all into researching animals, ethically of course, to provide reputable and ultimately indisputable scientific data concluding that animals have emotions, are empathetic and altruistic, are intelligent, conscious creatures. Right now, cows are being tested to grow up in virtual realities to ease stress. Don't condemn the people behind that. Focus on proving why cattle should be in hygienic spaces with adequate roaming and sunlight, not knee-deep in their waste. It's better for the land and soil, it's healthier for the animal, and therefore better for the human who consume that animal. instead of sending raw meat through X-rays to determine if any metals was accidentally lodged inside in the processing factory, prove the waste of resource and unsustainability of such business models while validating the claims of animal intelligence. I've derailed from the topic of this video. One of the great mysteries of evolution is the existence of human consciousness. I believe this is a self-inflicted problem in biology, as every living thing has consciousness. It's less of an issue equating humanity as being a special exception, and more of a general mystery that life is in fact living. The bigger, more interesting question unanswered by biology is how the chrysalis evolved, how amphibians evolved the ability to change their sex, the morphological abilities of certain creatures. I do not have the means of answering that question, but I think I can provide the direction for our inquiries, and it is within the context of microbiology and animal intelligence. When you look at things like radiolarians and other protists, you get the sense that you are seeing something alien. They have a symmetry and intricate art to their forms seldom seen in anywhere but crystals and other inorganic structures. It's also true that the more water-based creatures are capable of changing their bodies the fastest. Insects are essentially hydraulic creatures surrounded in chitin or simply very thick mucous membranes. Most insects are born as larvae and use the malleability of water-based life forms to become a hardened beetle, an ant, a butterfly, a bee. About 85% of insects undergo metamorphosis. Amphibians, of course, are primarily water, and any marine life is water-based. And so many are capable of incredible morphology in ways much different than insects. The octopus, for example, is a master of controlling its body. These particular creatures are starting to be recognized as sentient, something that should be recognized as not even being up to us to decide. It is sentient of its own accord, not because we declare it. Mammals, including humans, are still water-based and capable of morphology. This is really all evolution comes down to. I would go on to talk about water consciousness, but let's take it one step at a time. What is incredible is that ability for a microbe to convert something that is primarily hydrogen and oxygen, water, with a few added elements to create chitin, teeth, hair, bone, calcium, web, skin, and every adaptation in the world. Nature, including humans, are constructs of microorganisms, like the radiolarians, who are clearly artists and crafters. Microorganisms are builders and over millions of years have constructed and led to the natural world we understand today. Ultimately, nothing can evolve without microevolution. It is the very cells which are changed that lead to new traits and adaptations. I would even go so far as to theorize that human brains at some point symbiotically joined or were parasitically invaded and joined by some virus organism that has since blended and fused to our neural system, so well integrated that our very sense of self derives from this viral hacking of a mammal. Drug interaction and altered states of consciousness may even give us an insight to support this idea. When we become intoxicated on certain chemicals or are afflicted with certain severe mental disabilities like dementia or brain damage, we lose control over the body. It is proposed by some researchers that a drug like alcohol or psilocybin wears the host user temporarily. If consciousness is some special thing to humans imbued by God or a gift for winning evolution, it sure is fragile enough to be at the mercy of hundreds, even thousands of chemicals with varying effects. What this could mean for our possible virus-controlled brains is an understanding to the function of brain chemicals and neurons. Electricity affects us, drugs affect us, our mood affects us. Why not a viral organism? There are very few organisms that do not have some sort of microscopic form pulling the strings. It's an exception, not the rule. In defining the self, are we our bodies? Are we the brain, a super colony of millions of bacteria and specialized organs? Are we a soul inside a body, a consciousness in physical form? If we are virally infused brains, we'd feel like all the above. The control center of an organism's body, allowing for us to control movement and functions, while background processes go on without our decisions. We'd lose control during altered states of chemical interaction, while feeling everything that affects our body, except in the case of damaged or improper nerves. We are something in the body of a host organism, giving us full feeling but not utter control of. We can choose what information we retain by committing certain things to long-term memory, by choosing to store them in parts of our brain. That suggests an influence of the brain without being the brain itself. When we sleep and the brain shuts off feeling in the body, we experience nothing aside from dreams as activated by the presence of certain chemicals. You can train to be conscious during sleep, called lucid dreaming. Humans have reported feelings of not being in control of their body. Our bodies can react without our directive. Our senses tell us information: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. It suggests a middleman that must automatically interpret this information, an internal process by the brain, before we obtain that information. It cannot be the brain itself because the brain, like the body, works aside from our directive. The body can act independently from us when we sleepwalk, take certain drugs, and with certain mental disorders. Maybe it is an unsettling theory, but it is one worth investigating, or at least entertaining, as we take more seriously the role of intelligence and microevolution. Thanks for watching.